All right, everybody. It looks like we have got a pretty full house and we are ready to get started. Thank you for joining us this morning. Hopefully your audio is working. This is Josh Vanek and I work for the Montana Campus Compact, and this is the Community Building Institute for April 2018. So thanks for being here. I'm going to do a quick introduction to the series and then hand off the hot seat here to Colleen Kane, who is our first trainer of 6. And so we'll get Colleen going here shortly. So I work for Campus Compact, and this is a national organization made up of over 1,000 colleges and universities around the country. And the idea behind this network of higher ed institutions is that we advance the public good of higher education. So we look at ways that colleges partner with community, that they're doing work that impacts communities around them and our world, and we look to support those things. So any of the ways that students are learning how to be citizens in this world and in our country and state, and in those community partnerships. Like I said, we're a national organization, and here in Montana, we're hosted by the University of Montana. I'm only seeing part of the information on the screen, somebody says. I'm not sure what I can do on my end about part of the information. Give me more information, please, and I will see what I can do. What part is being, perhaps work on the settings on your screen. I'm doing a screen share of a PowerPoint presentation right now. So hopefully it makes its way there. We'll hope for the best. The top is cut off on the PowerPoint. Are other folks seeing the top of the PowerPoint cut off on their ends? Yeah, thank you. All right, it's looking like part of this thing is getting cut off. Well, why don't I try to do a different type of sharing and do my desktop. And then from the current slide, better. Okay, thank you for speaking up. Wish we had voices, but the webinar does not allow for it. Okay, so yeah, we advance the public purposes of higher ed around the country, all the ways that kind of the public good is kind of front and center for higher education. So here in Montana, we're a 17 campus network, and these are our affiliate campuses, all the way from Blackfeet Community College and Flathead Valley Community College in northwestern Montana, across the High Line to Fort Peck Community College and Dawson Community College, and all places in between. So we're proud to have all institution types as part of our network, from Montana University system public institutions to community colleges to tribal colleges to private institutions as well. We are a diverse consortium with all kinds of different communities and institution types involved, and we feel that makes us stronger. What do? We work with our affiliate campuses across the state to support their community-based and service learning work. Our executive director, Andrea, who will also be a presenter, does a lot of training around the state to support faculty and staff in kind of how do we reach outward from our campuses and really support community work, foster community partnerships, do anti-poverty work from higher ed, support college access and success. We operate several award and scholarship programs. We are very proud supporters and administrators, I guess, of an AmeriCorps and an AmeriCorps Vista program. And we know some of you come to us from our own AmeriCorps program or from other national service programs in Montana and around the country. So we're excited that you're here. And we also partner with great organizations like the Corporation for National and Community Service, the Montana Governor's Office for Community Service, Reach Higher Montana, and our fellow compacts, of course, across the country. So this series is called the Community Building Institute, and it's based on this 6-step process, community building process or community building life cycle that's oftentimes. And there's a graphic here that has kind of this, I'm just checking my chat box here, graphic here that has this kind of circle. And in the middle, you'll see the sun represents the community need. And I think this is an important thing to keep in mind as you go through these individual sessions that touch on the stops along the way through the community building life cycle. The need is always in the middle, and that's a different orientation sometimes than we have coming in. I know personally, it took me a while to get the fact that, you know, if you're doing community-led work, you really have to be focused on this community need and keep it at the center of your work. This life cycle is used both domestically and around the world really to empower communities to take ownership of change processes. It's a really powerful thing. It's not a linear thing. Like sometimes we like to think I put in these inputs and I get this result. You know, this is very different from a logic model approach. It's a circular process, and the steps along the way are very much meant to be revisited. Good community change leaders are always thinking about how do we go back and assess needs, because needs change, and what communities feel like their highest priorities are often are shifting incredibly fast. So the arrows go in one direction on this diagram, but oftentimes you'll find that folks move pretty nimbly from planning back to advisory groups, tweaking and thinking about, okay, let's think about, you know, where we need to be and who are the folks that we need around the table for this, you'll hear oftentimes. It's a good example of, it's not a perfectly linear process, but it's meant to be pretty fluid, and the direction kind of can go back and forth. And these steps are really designed to be revisited often. So that's kind of the overview for this community building life cycle that this series is based upon. So each session will focus on a stop along the way. We've got 6 amazing trainers, starting today with Colleen Kane, who is the Associate Director for the University of Montana Civic Engagement Office. And Colleen has been a CBI trainer probably for at least the past 5 years. She's an AmeriCorps alumna and all-around amazing person. We got Andrea Vernon, our director, who will do the next session on Thursday, and that's creating community awareness and stakeholder involvement. Andrea has been involved with Compact, National Service, Community Partnership, nonprofit work for at least the past 20 years, and has been a CBI facilitator for a long, long time as well. Shannon Stober is our third presenter. She's a week from today. Shannon currently runs her own business that's called Verve Exchange and does training largely for national service programs, but for other stakeholder groups as well. I'm going to pop out really quickly and grab my cheat sheet so I'm not talking out of school about all of our trainers here. Number 4 is Morgan Slemberger, and Morgan has also been a CBI trainer for a long time. She works for the Blackstone Launchpad at the University of Montana, where she is the Operations and Marketing Director. So she will help us in a session about social media and marketing. This, on the community building lifecycle graphic back there, is typically the implementation phase. And I think more often than not anymore, we're seeing folks are looking at what kind of a campaign through social media and other marketing channels can we launch to get this, this work underway. So that really will be the focus of what Morgan talks about. Rock Turner will lead the 5th session, which is strategic planning and implementation. Rock is the what is his title? He's at Bitterroot College, and I think he does the workforce training programs director or something of that nature is his job title, and he helps put together a lot of the job training programs that Bitterroot College offers from their Hamilton campus, and he's a Vista alum as well as a Navy veteran, and has been doing CBIs for a long time as well. And then our final session will be with Kate Chapin. And this one, please make a note as you're thinking about the next couple weeks, that this one is the only session that will not happen at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. Kate will actually start at 1 p.m. Mountain, 2 Central, 3 Eastern, and we'll do recordings of all of these. But that was the time that the only time on that day that we could make it work. So that one will happen at 1. She works for the University of Montana and is the director of field education and is an adjunct assistant professor from the University of Montana School of Social Work. She will talk about evaluation for everyday use and how to kind of evaluate impacts of projects. We've selected these trainers not just because they're folks we think are interesting and do great work, but because they're pretty passionate about the subject matter that they're going to present on. And they all make themselves available to you for follow-up questions. We know sometimes the webinar format is not the easiest for kind of thinking up questions in that moment, but we figured, you know, if you have questions afterward, we can kind of shuffle them. If you email me, and my email will be here at the end of this, we will forward them along to trainers who can help steer you toward resources. So those are our trainers. Some of the expectations that we have going through this, we ask that you be an active participant and you give this webinar your attention during the hour that it's happening. You know, I think if you've taken the time to be here, that might be redundant, but webinars and kind of this kind of learning can oftentimes, you know, our thinking about multitasking and so forth can mean that we're emailing while this is going on. And we really think you'll get more out of it if you monotask and just focus on the training for the time that it's happening, please. Trainers have all put together, researched either a reading or a video that Marcy just sent out the other day. So hopefully you got that reading list or that list of materials. And those are kind of set to kind of get your wheels turning around the subject matter for that session. So if you have time to, please read or watch those in advance, and we think they'll really kind of help enrich the learning. Log into sessions on time. Thank you for being here. If you miss a session, it's totally all right. Please watch the playback, and we'll send out links following each of the sessions. We also have some internal and external expectations. So the external side of this is the part that we're in control of. This is the actual content that our trainers are presenting, the stuff up on the screen and the words. This is what we're learning, the systems, the processes, the tools that you can use for your impact. The internal side of it is our own response. So this is the side that you're in control of, and I really like this distinction. It's how we're thinking things through, how we're changing our mindsets, how we're brainstorming, asking why or why not, and we really think this is the transformational part of this. So if you'll give some space to, okay, how am I making use of this stuff and letting this kind of soak in a little bit, I think it'll really help improve the quality of the sessions. And please do ask questions and feel free to follow up with trainers. I will happily connect you to them, and they are all very interested in this work and in your success with these tools. So if you email me, I will relay questions to them. My email is my last name, Vanek @mtcompact.org there. And I'm on the website too, if you forget that. So questions at this point before we jump in and hand it off to Colleen. Go to the chat here. All right. It looks as though you all are ready, so thank you so much. Here is our contact information with Campus Compact and our website, and I'm going to fire up Colleen's presentation now and give her the driver's seat. All right.
Perfect.
You want the ball or you want the...
I'll try the ball.
Okay.
Hi, folks. My name is Colleen, like Josh said, Colleen Kane. I'm the Associate Director of Community Engagement and Student Programs at the University of Montana, the Civic Engagement Office. I'm super happy to be here with you guys today. I talk kind of quickly, so if you need me to slow down, just put something up in the chat or the question box. Also, just a little bit of transparency. I'm recovering from a nasty bug, so I might be looking at my notes a little more than normal because I'm kind of seeing through a bit of a fog today. So hopefully it doesn't disrupt anything. So today we're going to talk about, the arrows, community assessment, what that looks like, how to do it, what are the steps, and what to kind of think about and keep in mind as you go through this process. These are the things we're going to cover in our session today. Narrowing down the issues to focus on, who to involve, what kinds of questions to ask, how to collect data, and what to do with that data once you collect it. So first off, let's talk a little bit about why we do community assessment. Why don't we just jump in with our ideas and get started? First off, it's always better to fully understand an issue before you try to leap in and try to fix something. When you have an increased understanding about the community needs and why they exist, you're much better off at creating solutions to those problems. It also helps increase your credibility when you're working with stakeholders and community partners. If you've done a really thorough community assessment, it just makes you more credible in the community and better able to tackle those complicated issues. It also allows community members and gives them an opportunity to kind of share their lived experience with these issues. And helps them give an opportunity for them to communicate how these problems impact quality of life on the ground and what these problems kind of look like for people that are experiencing them. So it lends a level of credibility, and it also gives you a more thorough understanding of the issues and just how deep the layers might go. It works to build stronger communities as well. If you're reaching out and doing a thorough community assessment, it helps bring in different members of the community on the issue that may not come together in any other kind of organic way. It helps include people in discussions and include them in being a part of the solution to the problem rather than just coming in and saying, this is what we need to do. It helps involve the people that are experiencing the issue that you're working with. It involves them in the solution, which is great. It also works to prevent ineffectiveness. If you have a good understanding of the needs, you're more likely to create programs and solutions that are actually addressing the need and not getting lost in the details. Throughout the process, it will also help you create an inventory for resources that are currently available in your community. This could be a great document to share with your community and with other stakeholders. An inventory of resources can also help you leverage different entities and different groups to have a bigger impact on the issue and improve the quality of life for all the community. A community needs assessment will help you identify asset gaps that exist in your community, and it will help prevent duplication of services as well. There might be somebody that's already working on this issue, and a good needs assessment can help uncover those programs and maybe see, are they working, are they not, do they need to be tweaked, what isn't being done, and will help you close the gaps to those services and better utilize the resources that exist in your community. And a needs assessment also indicates respect and honors people in the process, which is great. And then finally, if you're an AmeriCorps member on the call, you're probably sick of these two words, but it helps create sustainability and capacity building, which are important. If you're a member, then you already know the importance of those words. But community organizations can use the information about these community needs to help assess their service delivery priorities, maybe their service delivery methods, see if what they're doing is working well, what gaps it might have. It will provide data for making better decisions, and it will help a community know how to best use the available assets. Data can be used to inform strategic planning, which I think Rock will talk about later, priority setting, program outcomes, and help with program improvements. So these are all the reasons why we do community assessment. It's just better to fully understand a problem, who is involved, and what this issue looks like on the ground before we get started with trying to do something about it. So the 6 steps to community assessment are working to narrow and define the scope of your assessment, trying to figure out if you're going to do this alone or if you're going to collaborate with others, and the pros and cons to each of those. It will help you figure out how to collect the data, how to identify your key findings, how to set priorities based on those key findings, and then how to share your findings. So those are kind of the steps we're going to talk about. So to define the scope, I'm just going to show a quick video. Community needs are very complicated and they're very interrelated. So when you start to think about what issue you want to focus on, you might start to see that that issue isn't alone. It's connected and interrelated with a lot of other issues. So narrowing the scope of your focus might be a little challenging. And this video is just quick, 40 seconds, and there's no sound. It just kind of illustrates the process that might take place once you start to try to define your issue. Do you have to move this over?
Yeah. So, oh yeah, you got it.
Great. So that just kind of illustrates how you might start one place and then realize the needs kind of take you somewhere else, and that's okay. So the first step in defining the scope is trying to narrow down the key questions that you want answered. Information is great, but you might end up with too much of a good thing if your focus isn't narrowed and tailored specifically. So the assessment should hope to narrow down the information that you collect so you don't have too much of a good thing. So when you start to define the scope of your community assessment, you should first determine what specific needs you want to address. And like that video showed, you might end up in a different spot than you think you do. But choosing a good focus will help you develop a clear path to a successful community assessment. And many community issues are related to each other. So just know that that might come up. So to narrow down your key questions, it's important to really think about what's the heart of the issue you want to address. And you also want to maybe look at your geographic boundaries, what community members are most impacted by this issue when you're thinking about these key questions. I've got a list of some key questions that I'm just going to kind of go through real quick just to kind of get your brain turning and thinking about your own key questions and what those might look like. So you might want to look at what are the basic demographics of your community, considering maybe income levels, race or ethnicity, number of youth, number of elderly, just depending on what you're looking at. You might want to look at who are the faith-based and community organizations currently serving the people in your community, what services are they providing, and who are they providing them to? What services are local public agencies providing and to whom? You might want to look at law enforcement, courts, schools, workforce development, some things that might not typically be on your radar. You might want to look at faith-based community organizations. You might want to look at what organizations are funded by foundations or government agencies to help address the community issue you're looking at, and what are they doing? You might want to look at what local residents see as the primary needs of the community. What do they think are the biggest issues? You might want to look at what are the various intervention strategies that are currently being used to address the issue, and are they effective? Are they demonstrating any clear outcomes? Do they have gaps? Who are the leaders in your community, and what key players in maybe local government are concerned with the issues you're addressing? What local volunteer groups are working on the issue you're addressing? Who are the people in your community who care about the issue or are impacted by the issue? What community organizations focus on the issue, and are they delivering any services that are doing meaningful work in that area? Are their programs successful or are they not? Are there partnering opportunities with other nonprofits or faith-based organizations that you can partner with on the community needs assessment or maybe on the delivery and implementation side? What are the gaps in services to these people? What would a complete system look like? Maybe use your imagination and think, if this were really being done successfully, what could it look like? And then finally, are community members ready for a change in this area? And hopefully the answer is yes, but it might be no. So those are just some things to consider when you're looking to define or narrow or expand your key questions. Let's check in the chat. I think we're good. No questions, great. So when you're defining the scope, just kind of keep those questions in mind and really try to narrow your focus as much as possible. It's always easier to broaden it along the way than it is to start broad and then try to tailor it along the way. Great. So next we're going to talk about whether you should do this by yourself, go solo, or team up. I'm always a big proponent of collaboration, even though it does come with some extra challenges. Working with extra people, there's just extra minds in the room, extra expectations. It can always be an extra challenge, but I do think it comes with added benefit. Really, that's up to you to decide. The benefits to collaborating, I think the most important benefit is the level of resources that you might have available if you collaborate. Doing a needs assessment can suck up resources, and if you're collaborating, then you get to share those resources or you have extra resources. So take a look at the time, effort, and human resources you have available to do this work, and think about what various stakeholders you have available to you, what staff or volunteers or consultants you have available, maybe board members. So establishing collaborations will help increase the resources that you have available to conduct a quality needs assessment. Other benefits is that it engages more community members, which adds credibility to your assessment. It increases access to more data sources, which could be really good. It might save you some work down the line if you partner with somebody who's already collected a bunch of this data. It establishes relationships throughout the process that may help you when you get to the implementation phase. If you're building buy-in and relationships along the way, when you get time to kind of trying to create programs or whatever you're doing, you already have some people on board that get it. So if you do decide to collaborate with partners, which I think is, always is a good idea if you can do it, it's always good to really establish clear expectations up front, whether that's formalized in like an MOU or whether it's informal. Putting something in writing that's establishing what the goal is, what the roles and responsibilities are, who's doing what will really help keep this clean and transparent down the road. So if you're working with others, just make sure that you've got something in place that helps people understand who's doing what, so that the clear expectations are established from the get-go. So who you can collaborate with, just some ideas. But yeah, more resources will be available to you if you can collaborate. I know resources are always thin, so just a thought. The next step will be collecting data. There's lots of different ways to do that. But the best thing to start with is secondary sources, so data that's already collected by others. This is similar to when you're doing a research paper, doing a literature review to see what's already out there. You don't want to reinvent the wheel if the information you're trying to collect has already been collected, which would be great. So start your data collection with secondary sources, data that's already been collected by others, because other members in the community might have exactly what you need, which would be great. So start with local sources of information and then broaden as you need to, rather than starting really broad and then trying to narrow. You want to focus on the quality of data and the relevance to your issue rather than the quantity of data. Too much of a good thing, just trying to sift through a bunch of data that's not relevant is not going to help you, and it's just going to take a lot of time. So start local and small and relevant and broaden as you need to, if you need to. Primary, and then so once you've got your secondary sources, your literature review, if you will, then you can kind of see what you need to do some primary data collection, and that's the data that you collect yourself, first-hand data, and this will kind of be limited or determined by the amount of resources that you have available. So the primary data collection might be restricted by your capacity. You might want to think about how many stakeholders you intend to include and what that looks like. And then you'll want to kind of think about the resources it's going to take to do this data collection. Are you going to need food at the focus groups? Are you going to need to provide childcare or childcare vouchers? Do you need to have raffle prizes? Do you need to create some kind of incentive or stipend for participation? So just try to think about what resources you're going to need to do the data collection. And then that might lead you to determine whether or not you're going to partner with others or not, depending on what resources you need. So different primary data collection methods include structured conversations, which could look like interviews. They could include public forums or town hall meetings, focus groups, and surveys. Those are the most common forms of data collection. I'm going to take a minute now, and I want to kind of hear from you what of these methods you have tried, what you're familiar with, what you've tried, and what works. So hopefully this works for me, but I'm going to launch a poll. And so the first question is asking, which of the community assessment methods have you tried before? So you can answer, you can click on more than one. Have you tried interviews, public forums or town hall meetings, focus groups, surveys, or telephone polls? Go ahead and click now if you've tried any of these things. And then the second question is, which of these methods did you find ultimately successful? Oh, great. So these surveys are coming. About half of you have responded, so keep going, and once you've all responded, I'll share those results. This will give you an idea of kind of what others have tried and what they think is successful. So maybe you can kind of narrow down what you want to focus on based on this or not. This will also let you know who's done what before, so maybe you can collaborate with your peers on some of these things. Great, looks like all of you have responded. I'm going to end that and share the results with you. Can you see those results? Yes, good, great, thank you. Great, so it looks like a lot of people have tried interviews, which is great. That's usually not one that's super common in surveys. Surveys is usually pretty common. So what of those were successful? Interviews seem to be pretty successful. Surveys seem to be pretty successful. Focus groups had some success. Great, so this just kind of gives you a just real quick snapshot of what are people trying, what do they think is working, things like that. Great, thank you for humoring me. I like to see what you folks are working on and what you think is worthwhile. Thank you. So it just gives you a little idea of the different types of things that are out there. Now we're going to go through each of these in just a little bit of detail, so you can kind of be thinking about that while we're talking through these details. So structured conversations or interviews with stakeholders, this method can take a lot of time and resources, but the information you get is really rich. The interviews can either be one-on-one, which is really good if the information you're collecting might be sensitive, or people might not want to talk about it in a big group setting. They do take a lot of time because if you're doing one-on-one, you can only deal with one person at a time, and that can take up a lot of your time and resources. But like I said, the information you get might be a lot more personal, might be a lot more rich than you get in a group process. Another model that you might want to look at is the SWOT analysis, and it's pretty common. This is a pretty common format, so you might already be familiar, but this just takes a look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats or barriers that you might come across. So this is just a good broad model. If you don't know where to start, this might be a good one to look at. The ground rule for these conversations, though, there's really no wrong answers. You're trying to collect information and trying to you want to validate what you're hearing. So no wrong answers, and capture everything that you're hearing through writing it down, either easel paper, or if it's just a one-on-one interview, that would be silly. So you can just make sure you're capturing these conversations really accurately the best way that you can. So questions for SWOT analysis, looking at what are the strengths of your community, group, or effort? What might be the weaknesses of that, weaknesses or gaps in that effort? What opportunities exist that you maybe haven't implemented yet, or that you might be able to use through partnership or collaboration? And then what might be the potential barriers? So the structured interviews, like I said, they take the most amount of time, and it's also really important to consider your demographic when planning these. This will help you determine like the time of day you do it, whether childcare is needed, whether folks are going to have transportation or parking issues, things like that. So it's important to think about when you're thinking about these, whether you want to do this individually or when maybe you can do small group interviews. So different things to think about if you're going to be going towards these more structured conversation options. But like I said, really rich data and opportunities to collect maybe more sensitive information. The next option is public forums or town hall meetings. These are similar to maybe group interviews. They're just a little less structured. With a group interview process, you would have really specific questions you want answered, and you would really direct the conversation in that way. With public forums or town hall meetings, you might have an agenda you want to get through, but it's going to be less structured. It's going to be more conversational. It'll be a space for people to speak their minds, talk about the issues they find important, and hopefully find solutions to a problem through a group process. The main thing about this is going to be advertising. You're going to want to get the people in the room that you want to hear from. So you want to think about how are you going to get the word out and how are you going to get them into the room. So targeted advertising is key. You're going to have to identify a facilitator, hopefully a neutral person. Maybe you're not the best person to facilitate that process. Maybe you want to get somebody from the community to facilitate that. You want to get a neutral person so you get really, really genuine data, really genuine conversations to happen. Also, you want to make sure, just like with the interviews, that you're capturing everything as accurately as possible. So you want to have a note taker. And the note taker should not be the facilitator. The facilitator should be focused on really facilitating a good conversation. And as somebody who likes to multitask, I've been the facilitator and the note taker, and it's really hard to do both well. So just make sure you have two separate people to do that. So you'll set an agenda. It's not as strict as an interview protocol, an agenda for a town hall or a public forum, but hopefully you'll have a guided conversation and have an idea of what questions you want to ask. Just know that the conversation may take twists and turns, and you'll have to have a plan for how you're going to respond to things that come up that are kind of outside of the scope of what you want to address. A good tip for that is maybe having a parking lot where you can write down issues that are just kind of way out of the scope, and then if you have time at the end, you can go back to those or say, oh, this is great for the parking lot, we'll think about these and get back to you, kind of a thing. So to keep things moving, the facilitator should open the meeting, recognize those on the floor and help keep things running smoothly. And the note taker will just kind of make sure they're accurately capturing the conversations that you're having. So it's a little less structured than the interview process, a little more open, a little more discussion based, a little bit looser. So along those lines, kind of the next one down are going to be listening session or focus groups. And a focus group is similar to a town hall or a public forum, except you're really inviting very specific people into the room, specific demographics you want to hear from, people that have maybe participated in programs before that you want to hear from. So it's less broad, less public, less open, and just more of a focused conversation. It's a carefully planned series of discussions to obtain really specific information. It should be a really permissive and non-threatening environment, whereas a town hall is just kind of open season a little bit. So these sessions are highly focused but conversational. You still want to keep them conversational. And they're usually held in small groups of like demographic people. So maybe people that have all participated in some type of intervention before, or maybe it's all a specific age group, just depending on what information you're trying to collect. It will likely be a similar group of people. The more people you have, the more rich data you'll collect, but also keep in mind that the conversation might not be as structured if you have a larger group, so just think about the size. Also, when you're recruiting folks, since you do want to recruit from a really specific group of people, it's really good if you explain to them why you really value their input or why you need them to come to your focus group or your listening session. That helps get people. If you throw out just a broad call, you probably don't get the same results as if you send out individual invitations saying, hey, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on these. Can you come to this focus group? So the more personal you can make it with these, the better. You'll get the right people in the room. Also be respectful of their time and mindful of their barriers when you're having these discussions, which is good with all these things too. I think surveys are probably the data collection method we are all most familiar with. I've taken a zillion surveys. I'm sure you have too. I've also facilitated a lot of them. It's a great way to collect a really large amount of data from a large group of people. It doesn't take a whole lot of planning. The implementation, if you're doing email, can just be as easy as hitting a button to get the surveys out there. When you may not have a lot of time or resources to get structured feedback, surveys can be a really great tool, and it can help you reach a broader audience. The data is often really quantifiable, and sometimes it's really easy to analyze the data if you've got it in a survey format. So there are a lot of reasons why surveys are done a lot. I haven't done many surveys recently that were in person or over the phone, so I think those may be going out of style a little bit in place of the electronic surveys. So think about your demographic and whether an electronic survey is going to be appropriate or not. If you're working with seniors, you might want to think about doing them in person or over the phone or even paper versions. So just think about your demographic when you're thinking about the type of tool you're going to use. Concerns with surveys, response rate is always a big concern. You know, sending out you might reach a large amount of people, but maybe only a few of those are responding. Whereas with a focus group, if you get the people in the room, you're going to get the information from them. Also, blank responses are a concern if they're skipping questions. There's kind of a lack of accountability with surveys. People will say whatever they want to say. You know, if it's an anonymous survey, you might get kind of skewed results because maybe only the people that have something negative to say are going to fill it out. So you want to think about, you know, the types of responses you could get through surveys versus another format. And then like lack of response could be another challenge. So when you're creating a survey, it's really good to think about the types of questions you're asking and how you're asking them. You want to avoid impartial or leading questions. You don't want to say, tell me why you love volunteering with us or something like that. So just think about the format of your questions and how you're wording it. Maybe get somebody who's not in your organization to read through it to make sure you're not having kind of a biased or a skewed view when you're creating these questions. Also think about the pros and cons of using open-ended questions. I love them because you get richer data and you get more information, but it's harder to analyze that data, and it's also more subjective to analyze that data. So just think about the pros and cons of adding in open-ended questions. Then also think about how you'll distribute those surveys. Like I mentioned, electronic surveys are pretty common and they're really easy to distribute. Where are they going to hit your target demographic? So think about those types of things when you're thinking about surveys. So you got your data. Now what do you do with it? So this is kind of a lot going on this slide. Sorry, I should have broken it up more. But first, you're going to want to organize your key findings into categories. They don't necessarily have to be these strengths, gaps, opportunities, challenges categories. Whatever categories work well for you. You just want to have some way to organize the data into meaningful chunks that you can actually use. If it's organized into categories, it will help you summarize the data and make use of it, make meaning of it. It'll help you use the information more effectively when you're planning and in creating an action, creating a response to that plan. So you also want to present your findings to stakeholders and help establish priorities. You might want to send your findings to the participants if that's appropriate and let them know what you found out. You might want to send your findings to the collaborators, the partners, the community partners you worked with. You might want to send the findings or your final report to local government agencies. Maybe city council would be interested. Maybe the public health department would be interested. Just think about what's appropriate for how to share the information you've collected. Maybe you want to share it with your board or your leadership. Maybe you want to issue a press release. Just think about what's appropriate. But you don't want to keep this information to yourself if it's going to be useful for others as well. Establishing priorities with your findings, I think, is the biggest challenge. Establishing priorities and then creating an action plan for this. The reason is because it takes kind of developing a consensus among stakeholders and your collaborators on how these issues should be addressed. How should this information be interpreted? What action steps should come from this information? And the more people you have in the room, the more collaborators you have, the more ideas and thoughts in the room there are going to be about how to move forward with this information. So I'm just going to talk through a few of the barriers or the challenges you might encounter when trying to establish priorities from the information you've collected, just so you kind of have these in the back of your mind, because maybe you can avoid these challenges from the get-go if you've kind of thought about them. The first challenge you might come up against is getting people to focus on the key issues, decisions, and conflicts that are there. And I call this the human problem. There are lots of just different personalities in the room, coming from different places, thinking about different solutions. So setting initial priorities that you did at the very beginning, it's good to come back to that and remind people, this is what we set out to do. This is the information we collected. And now take this information and how does it relate back to those initial priorities? So keeping those priorities firmly in mind will help keep you on track. Stress the value in recognizing different viewpoints. You can't really go in every single direction. People might have lots of different ideas for what direction to go in. Make sure everybody's ideas are valued and make sure that there's space for differing or conflicting viewpoints. This isn't the time to shut people down. Let things be heard. Sometimes just putting it out there is enough. People don't maybe have to grasp onto their idea, but letting it be heard is really helpful. Also, build in time to allow people to reflect on the information and process it and think about their ideas and their decisions beforehand. So maybe you want to send the findings or the information out to whatever group you're working with before you meet together so that they can process on their own and think about it. Maybe remind them of the initial priorities you established and then come together as a group so they're not having to process and think while they're also trying to think about solutions or in a group setting. I'm an introvert and I need time to think about stuff. Others might too. So build in that time. So that's the human problem. Humans aren't necessarily a problem, but there can be conflict. So the next challenge you might come up against is managing information and ideas during the priority setting process. So this can be the process problem. So to work with this, I think it's just good to be very specific and clear about your priorities to minimize multiple interpretations of the data. Always come back to your initial priorities. Like I said, make the key information available prior to any meetings you have, and then be mindful of taking up too much time to analyze the information. Sometimes you can just get in a loop of going through it and thinking about different interpretations, and you get into this space of analysis paralysis where you're just spinning your wheels and going over and over. So you want to avoid that, but you also want to avoid kind of rushing through the process and jumping to conclusions without fully digesting the information you've collected. So those are the kind of two extremes of how you can get stuck in this process problem. The next thing down, I think, is the challenge you might encounter of setting the priorities across different issue areas. Like you mentioned at the beginning, community needs are often really interrelated. They're really complex. They can step on each other's toes. So setting priorities across different issue areas can be a challenge, but cultivating open communication, nurturing relationships throughout the process can help, and keeping your focus on the current priorities, always going back to those initial priorities you set will help keep you on track and kind of avoid this structure problem where they're getting bogged down in the interconnectivity and complexity of these issues. Another challenge you might encounter is the challenge of translating priorities into action steps. So this can be called the institutional problem. You want to build on the existing strengths that you have. If you have programs in place, maybe don't throw them out and start fresh. What can you use that's currently working and how can it be tweaked? So work on the strengths that you currently have. Create well-defined implementation plans. This goes back to if you're working with others, you always want to have clear goals and expectations outlined. So when you're creating the plan, create those expectations as you go. It's so much easier to do that than to come back and be like, well, I thought you were doing this, or you said you could help with this. So create those expectations throughout the process. That will help. And then make sure that those responsible for carrying out key tasks are on board with these changes. They're committed to the information you found. They're committed to the changes. It's really easy for folks in a group setting to be like, oh yeah, sure. And then they think about it like, I didn't really like how that conversation went, and I'm not really on board with the solution. So just make sure that those that are responsible for carrying out key tasks are really on board, and they've had their ideas heard, and they feel like they've got buy-in to this process. So findings, priorities, and action steps, these are the most important parts of this process, but they can also be the most complex because it's really trying to take subjective information that you've collected and trying to create new ideas and processes for moving forward. This is where the rich stuff happens. This is where the rubber meets the road. Gosh, I went through that pretty quickly, those last 3 steps. Am I running out of time? I don't have a clock. Questions? Any questions? Great, I'm gonna share, I'm not seeing any questions. I'm gonna share some great resources because I did go through this information pretty quickly. I think if I click on it, I can pull them up to just kind of show you where to find a little more information on each of these steps. So this community toolbox is a really good resource. If you click on this Learn a Skill box, table of contents, they've got a lot of great information on community assessment here, assessing community needs and resources, and this goes through a lot more than I had time to go through today. So if you just got some ideas, but you need some more information, this has a lot of great information. So that's a really good site. And then this next one is also a really good site. Let me see if it's going to go. I can show what that looks like. It's not quite as in depth, but it goes through the steps we just talked about in just a little bit more detail. So those are 2 resources you can kind of go back to for a little bit more information. Great. Any questions, thoughts, concerns? My contact information is there. I'm happy to talk through ideas with you. I can direct you to additional resources, things like that. Great. Well, if there's nothing else, you can contact me at any time. I'm happy to help. Otherwise, thank you for being with me today, and I hope this gave you some good ideas for how to start with the community assessment in a good, mindful way, so that you have good results at the end. Great. Thank you all, and enjoy your future CBI sessions later this week and beyond. Thanks. I don't know how to stop it.
Go well?
I think so. There's no clock though, so I have no idea how I'm doing on time.
You're doing good.